One more sleep until basketball is back. Yep, Wednesday. We're 1 day away from the Sweet 16. Kevin Sweeney, Brad Cavallero coming to you from the CBB Central podcast as per usual, previewing the Sweet 16 and Elite Eight. Brad, it's been 3 days without basketball. It's been rough, man. I don't. How have you been surviving it?
It just always feels like that there's something I should be doing right now, but there's nothing to do because I wasn't too enthused for those NIT games. I know we have a couple going on as we speak between Western Kentucky and Oklahoma State, and then St. Mary's in Utah. But those didn't really move the needle for me.
Yeah, I was in and out on the Western Kentucky game, just kind of, if nothing else, since I really haven't watched any NIT, just kind of getting a feel for the quarters. We'll see my thoughts on that. I'm still anti-quarter, but I think that's more of a argument we could have in the off season. But Brad, we got plenty to get into today because we've got the Sweet 16 beginning tomorrow, as I mentioned, and there are going to be some really juicy matchups kind of going up and down the whole bracket, and a lot to be determined as we head towards San Antonio. Brad, let's start it off in the South region, a region that's been flipped on its head by upsets. We begin Sweet 16 play tomorrow at 7:07 Eastern with Nevada and Loyola. Two mid-majors, two teams I wrote about today. I don't know if you guys check that out. But definitely go give that one a read, mostly about pace and space and kind of the modern offensive philosophies there. But this is a game I'm looking forward to more than any other one in this Sweet 16. Two really talented teams that I've seen a lot of this season. Two teams that I think if they win could go to the final. Whichever team wins, I think can go to the Final Four legitimately. What are your kind of initial thoughts on this one, Brad?
I think that this game is probably the most appealing to the diehard fan and probably borderline unwatchable to the casual fan. You know, just in terms of brand equity, I think like a Loyola Chicago Nevada game it isn't going to attract the casual viewer. And I know we had one probable casual viewer from Fox Sports have the hottest of all hot takes recently, saying that mid-majors should not even be in the tournament. I didn't read the article nor click on it because I figured it was just meant to enrage. But I'm sure he's not the only one that feels the same way. In terms of the game itself, it's going to be really interesting because both teams are pace and space, but Nevada has a lot more size and length in terms of positions. You got guys like Caleb Martin, Cody Martin, Stevens, and Hall. They're all in that 6'5" to 6'7" range, where Loyola is a little smaller in the backcourt with Custer and Ben Richardson, who are excellent defenders, but they're going to be asked to be guarding, bigger and potentially more athletic players. I don't know if we're going to make picks now for these games, but if that's what we're planning, I think I'm going to go with Nevada in this one.
Yeah, why don't we do some picks, because who doesn't love to hear our wonderful opinions? This game's interesting to me, as you said. I think the length is something in the backcourt that will really give Loyola some problems. Clayton Custer, I thought, struggled a little bit in opening weekend in creating space one-on-one and getting dribble penetration. And to probably match up, my guess is they'll put Josh Hall on him for some. I guess is they'll put one of the Martin twins on him at some point. So that'll be a really interesting matchup there. I think the other matchup that's really interesting to me in this game is the tempo, because obviously both teams do embrace that pace and space, but Loyola's a team that wants to play in the half court. Certainly they move the ball excellently, but this game they want to play in the half court. If Nevada can get this game up and down, that'll force Cam Krutwig, the outstanding freshman big man for Loyola, off the floor. Krutwig is a very talented player. He can score in post-ups. He's an excellent passer. They do a lot with him catching in the high post and distributing out for threes. But if this game gets up and down, he can't run with Jordan Caroline, and they'll have to take him off the floor. So I think that's one of the really interesting matchups that I'm looking forward to in this ball game. I think I'm leaning towards Loyola in this one. I think Andre Jackson's a guy who's kind of against most teams, he's a mismatch, but in this game, he's kind of a perfect matchup for Jordan Caroline when he does wind up playing the 5. I think they can also go smaller and play Cameron Krutwig at the 5 and Andre Jackson at the 4, perhaps a little bit, which they did against Tennessee to combat the size of Tennessee. There's going to be some really interesting matchups in this ball game. I also just, Nevada has no depth, and both games last weekend probably took a lot out of them. Obviously, they didn't go home. They went directly to Atlanta. So they got a little bit of a chance to heal. And a lot of their team is banged up. I know. I think Kendall Stevens had a hand injury of some kind. Jordan Caroline still being bothered by, I believe, a hand or a finger. I believe it's Cody Martin, who's kind of struggled with a foot injury. One of them had a Liz Frank that they're kind of getting over, but it's still not, fully 100%. So how does this team kind of react after two really hard-fought emotional ball games to coming out and playing against a Loyola team that's a lot deeper? They go 8 to 9 deep. They're very comfortable bringing guys like Bruno Skopna and even Cam Satterwhite off the bench for 5-8 minute intervals in the first half, something that Nevada really just doesn't have the luxury to do.
Yeah, a couple other guys who, kind of surprising to me. Lucas Williamson for Loyola. He's a freshman. He's played a lot in the tournament. I think he may be playing more in the tournament than he did in the regular season. And then Marquez Towns is a Fairleigh Dickinson transfer, who I believe starts for them at the 3. So they do have some guys that can kind of match Nevada's length, but Nevada's one of the most committed teams to that, versatile, let's play all of our wings. And in regards to Nevada's depth, it could benefit them that Loyola Chicago is 319th in tempo. Nevada likes to play faster, but with so few players, that slower pace, potentially could be beneficial. I think you made a great point about Cameron Krutwig too, where even in the Miami and Tennessee games, that there were times where you could tell that they wanted him in for his offense, but in terms of the speed and the athleticism of guys like DeJuan Huell, he's couldn't be on the court at all times.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned Marcus Towns. I think he's really important in this game because when you're playing Custer and Richardson, neither guy in the backcourt is the 1 and the 2. Neither guy is a guy who's very good at creating off the bounce against more athletic defenders. Williamson can do a little bit of that, but right now he's more of a shooter. He's a breakout guy next year, but right now he's been pretty solid as kind of a 6-man type. But with Towns, he's such an important piece for them because he's one of the guys who can go create his own shot off the bounce and get to the rim. He's a guy who can shoot the 3. He shoots it at 38%. Not a huge in attempts, but he just does a really good job. He's physical. He'll probably draw one of the Martin twins defensively. He gets rebounds for them. He can put the ball on the deck. He's a really important guy for what they do offensively and defensively. And then we haven't really touched on Dante Ingram, where he kind of fits into this because he's that perfect player to start this pace and space system. And I wrote about this in my article, is that, he's 6'6", 215 pounds, shoots the 3 at 40%, can go get a rebound. So it'll be really interesting to see, what matchups and what lineups Loyola is able to employ, because they have a lot of length. They have a lot of athletes, but also with Custer and Richardson kind of anchoring the backcourt, with Custer kind of running the show and Richardson a defensive pest, does a lot of the glue guy things. It just becomes a challenge to, get dribble penetration. And I think they'll really need that from not only from Towns and Ingram, but also by playing through the high post with Cameron Krutwig passing out. So if the tempo can get forced and get Loyola to be unable to play Cameron Krutwig in this ball game, I think that's a really big disadvantage for the Ramblers.
Yeah, and one last thing regarding this game that I wanted to point out, Tennessee is a top 10 defensive team, and I thought that Loyola got some really good shots in that game. I think that they really controlled most of the game until the end when Tennessee made a late push. But Custer and Richardson, they kind of made up for their lack of top flight athleticism and creation abilities with a really good shot fake. I know that there were multiple occasions where the ball was moving and they were shot faking and getting defenders up in the air, and they were even so willing to pass that they got shot clock violations, passing up good shots, trying to get a great shot, which, is a encouraging sign, especially when you're playing a Nevada team that's one of, the worst defensive teams among the best teams, if that makes sense. They're 109th in defensive efficiency in KenPom, whereas, Tennessee is 6th and Miami was 47th. So this is a, significantly worse defense, even though they have so much length. And so maybe Loyola's discipline and their great half court sets. That they ran that great hammer play against Miami to get Custer a corner three. Maybe stuff like that could give them an edge here.
Yeah, I think that's kind of all we have to say on this matchup. I think that was a pretty in-depth look at that one. I'm really excited for it. Once again, I'm rolling with Loyola, Brad rolling with Nevada in the opener of the Sweet 16. In the other game of the South Regional, Kansas State, Kentucky facing off in Atlanta. That place will be a very heavy Kentucky home crowd. John Calipari today saying that the players need to avoid the poison, that they're guaranteed a Final Four spot and continue to stay focused. This game to me could be really fun, and it also could be really just bad and ugly because Kentucky can't really shoot. Kansas State played just putridly against UMBC and still found a way to win. I think I'm leaning just towards Kentucky's talent right now, but I don't really have a strong read on this game, Brad.
Yeah, so this is a total toss-up in the sense that Kansas State's getting their second best player, or maybe even their best player, back from injury. Dean Wade, who's like a skilled 6'9", 6'10" power forward. He missed the 2 games in the first 2 rounds of the NCAA tournament, and some, if not all, of the Big 12 tournament. So he's a very key piece for them. He has the size and the skill to be able to compete at that power forward spot, which is a strength for Kentucky. I know against Creighton and against UMBC, Kansas State used Xavier Sneed, who's more of a 2-3. They used him at the 4, and they played their 3 guards together, Cartier-Giara, Kamau Stokes, and Barry Brown. I don't know if they can do that against Kentucky with Kentucky's size and athleticism. Guys like Kevin Knox at the 3 are 6'9", 6'10". I don't think a guy like Barry Brown could cover him. So as long as Kentucky can use this size and athleticism advantage to their advantage, I think that they should win this game pretty easily.
Yeah, that's kind of where I am with the size, and I think it's really interesting because Dean Wade's going to play the 4. How healthy will he be? How mobile will he be? He's not a guy who's quick off the bounce as it is. So if he loses a step of quickness, that really hurts his ability to be effective, especially against such an athletic Kentucky team. I think Kansas State's guards are just going to have to ball out. Cartier-Giara was terrible against UMBC. They're going to need a big one from him. Nicole Moween, I remembered how to pronounce his name, but then I forgot. He's a really solid player for them, but he's going to have to stay on the floor. He's had some foul woes at times this year because they just don't have the front court depth against a Kentucky team that does. I think for Kentucky, the key is just to be more aggressive. I think at times they settle for shots, especially given that they aren't a 3-point shooting team as their strength. I think that when they're playing their best, it's when Shea Alexander is just attacking, and distributing out of it. When they play like they did against Buffalo, they're going to be really tough, and they could win a national title because Diallo played well in that game. Alexander was playing extremely well in that game. Kevin Knox was very solid in that game. He had a few really solid moments in there, and then the rest of their team they hustle and they get rebounds and they're so athletic. It's such a tough matchup. And I think Wenyen Gabriel had a solid ball game as well. So, I'm really interested here to see what happens. I think this game could really get mucked up if Kentucky can't hit threes. That game could get really ugly and play into the 50s. I think that would play into the strengths of Kansas State in this one. I think that's what Kansas State will want to do is just kind of hang around and try to hit big shots late when you have a guy like Barry Brown, a guy like Kamau Stokes, a guy like Dean Wade.
Yeah, I had wanted to bring up Wenyen Gabriel. He went 7 for 7 from 3 in the semifinal of the SEC tournament against Alabama, and even since then, he's shot the ball extremely well. He's up to 40% from 3 on the season, and with his size and length, he's 6'10" or 6'9", and he always plays with such great energy. His issue has been making a lot of little mistakes, a lot of missed layups and missed finishes. But if he's hitting threes, and he'll always give you energy and rebounding from that power forward position. Kentucky just has just another huge weapon and even more 3-point shooting on a team where 3-point shooting was seen as a weakness. if you can put Quade Green, Shai Alexander, Kevin Knox, and Gabriel, those are four guys that can knock down threes, and that I think transcends Kentucky to a much more dangerous team than their fifth seed would suggest.
Yeah, and the door's open. I know as much as John Calipari might not want to hear it, or at least he doesn't want his players to hear it, the door is wide open for this Kentucky team to go to the Final Four. Because, yes, Loyola is a really good team, and yes, Nevada is a really good team, and yes, Kansas State can play. But, I mean, Kentucky is by far more talented than any of these teams. If Kentucky plays to their level, they will win this game, and they will win the next game, and they will go to the Final Four. So it's a really interesting challenge for me, I think, and I think we'll certainly see what happens. But Kentucky certainly in the driver's seat here in the South region to head to San Antonio.
Yep. So I'm taking the Kentucky Wildcats in this game. Who are you taking this one, Kevin?
I think I'm going to lean Kentucky.
Okay, so that's our first one that we're on the same page out of the first two. Moving on to the third game, or the first game in the West region between Texas A&M and Michigan. I think this is a sneaky, really compelling matchup. So what are your thoughts on this Texas A&M and Michigan Sweet 16 game?
My head is sort of telling me to just pick Texas A&M because I think Texas A&M is playing really good basketball. I think that Michigan will have some trouble with the size that Texas A&M can kind of bring to the table. But at the same time, my heart and maybe my back of my head is just telling me I shouldn't bet against John Beilein in this type of ball game, because whenever I look at Michigan and say this is a mismatch for Michigan, whether it's Duncan Robinson might get played off the floor in this one, whether it's Mo Wagner will have to guard Tyler Davis, and that's a really tough matchup for him. Part of me just trusts John Beilein to run good sets and run good defense in order to get around this problem. And he's done such a good job. He did it against Purdue in the Big Ten tournament. He did it against Michigan State in the Big Ten tournament. I think they could kind of employ a similar game plan here. To me, the key to this game, though, is TJ Starks. He's got to play well for Texas A&M. So I'm going to lean right now to picking Michigan over Texas A&M. But I could truly go either way, because Texas A&M, if they play the way they did against North Carolina, they might screw around and win a national title, because that was just a special display by the Aggies and Billy Kennedy's club.
Yeah, so I think you really hit the nail on the head, where the key in this game is the size, where Texas A&M's Robert Williams, he's so athletic and he's so big that he could guard smaller players, and A&M uses a lot of zone anyway. And Williams and Davis are such difficult covers for opposing teams, especially a team like Michigan. However, when Michigan played Michigan State, who's another big team, they kind of forced Michigan State to go small. I'm pretty sure that's the only game I saw this year where Michigan State played Bridges at the 4. And Texas A&M also has those capabilities, similar to Michigan State. Williams and Davis are so good that you always want them on the floor. Michigan State, Jackson and Ward, you usually want them on the floor. But A&M, has a guy like DJ Hogue who can slide down to the 4, or a freshman Savion Flagg, who's kind of their power forward of the future. And I think they have enough shooting. And as you mentioned, TJ Starks has really been hitting shots. He's such a key piece in their win over Providence. Starks hit some pretty big shots, but he was very wild with his decision making. Even I think Bill Raftery doing the game was like, what on earth is this kid doing? Trying to take guys one-on-one when he has two of the best post players in the country. I think that Starks is going to rein in this one, and I think that A&M is going to pull out a win here.
Yeah, I mean, I was just kind of looking at some interesting stats here, and a lot comes down to Stark, and a lot comes down to their ball movement. When Texas A&M has 16 or more assists in a game, they're 16-2, based on my quick count here. Otherwise, they're a losing team by a significant margin. It's to me, it's all about ball movement, especially when you're playing a guy like Starks at point guard, who may be more of a score first guy by trade. They have to do a really good job of continuing to not let the ball stick. I thought they did a lot of interesting things against North Carolina with maybe some post ups for their wings. I think they got DJ Hogue a couple of looks on the post up at kind of 6'9", 220, a bit of a mismatch there. He had 4 assists in this ball game. The ball just never really stuck in that ball game, which I think is just really critical for this team if they're gonna pull this upset.
Yeah, definitely, especially with a guy like Dwayne Wilson out, who was, he was a little too attack heavy when I watched A&M this year, but he's definitely more of a ball mover than TJ Starks is. And I think that we should also mention that Admon Gilder, he poses such a threat because he's a smaller and a quicker off guard, but he could also really shoot the ball. I think luckily, Michigan has a guy in Muhammad Ali Abdur-Rahman who could match up with him and maybe slow him defensively. Where UNC has Kenny Williams, who's not known as a lockdown defender on the team's best perimeter player. Providence doesn't really have anyone who can stop a smaller and quicker scoring guard. So that's an area where I think that Michigan could actually hold their own there.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because, for a Sweet 16 game, you expect, great guard play. You don't really see that in this ball game. Michigan has their fair share of solid guards. Obviously, Abdur-Rahman, as you mentioned. Charles Matthews is a solid player. Jordan Poole's developing. Xavier Simpson's had a nice season. But combine that with guys like TJ Starks and Admon Gilder. I mean, certainly no one's a slouch there, but there's not a true all-conference level player in that mix. And so, it's really interesting to see, a game in this late in the tournament be so defined by its big men. I think the Tyler Davis versus Mo Wagner matchup is really interesting. Wagner's ability to kind of step out, put the ball on the deck a little bit versus Davis's, pure post moves and brute strength in the post. I think it might be interesting to see Robert Williams get matched up on Wagner a little bit just because he's a little more athletic, can defend in space a little bit better than Davis. I know that creates some tough mismatches, especially if Michigan's going to go small with Robinson at the 4. But that'll be an interesting matchup. We'll see how much John Teskey plays in this game. I know he played a lot in the Big Ten tournament, So I'm interested to see this game overall. I really don't have too strong a sense of who I like in it. I think I'm going to bet on Beeline and Michigan winning late, though.
Yeah, I was going to say this is going to be a big John Teskey and Isaiah Livers game for Michigan. Is they're the more physical players. All right, so you're going with Michigan. I'm going to go with Texas A&M. So we have another conflicting opinions here. Should we move on to the final game of Thursday?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, we got Florida State and Gonzaga, which is the late game in the West region. Florida State obviously upset Xavier on an epic choke job, and Gonzaga was able to survive UNC Greensboro, and they survived a late push from Ohio State. So, Kevin, who did you have in this unexpected Sweet 16 game?
I've been on Gonzaga kind of the entire NCAA tournament. I have them in the Final Four in my original bracket, one of the few picks that looks like it may still hold true. I think I'm still going to roll with them here. Florida State's a really interesting team. I kind of have a question for you, Brad. Is Leonard Hamilton the most underrated or the most overrated coach in college basketball? Because I feel like he's one or the other. He's so, in some ways, he's a really solid coach. He recruits. They're always competitive. But at the same time, he recruits talent and never really goes that far. We've got a Sweet 16 here, but as you said, kind of a choke by Xavier. What's your opinion of Leonard Hamilton before we get too far into this breakdown?
That's an excellent question because he's someone who's very respected, among from the announcers and the national media people. But I had heard that if last season's team with Jonathan Isaac, Dwayne Bacon, and Xavier Rattan-Mays, if that team didn't make the NCAA tournament, I had heard that he was gone, absolutely gone, fired, similar to Texas A&M this year. But I think he's a good coach. He's another one of those guys. I know that we talked about this last time, that he's insistent on playing everybody. I think last year they had an 11-man rotation, and this year everyone who's not redshirting or healthy, plays at least 10 minutes a game, which pays dividends as we can see. Where I expected in the preseason Florida State to be down at the bottom of the ACC with like Wake Forest and Boston College and Georgia Tech. But guys like Phil Kofer and C.J. Walker and Brandon Golaradis and Terrence Mann, who got these minutes earlier in their career, and Trent Forrest too had a huge game against Xavier. These guys were like bit pieces as freshmen, sophomores, and now that they are getting more minutes, they've kind of steadied the tide and steadied Leonard Hamilton's career here at Florida State.
Yeah, I think you make a real interesting point about Hamilton playing everybody. I think part of that insistence is the way he recruits lots of really long athletes who still need to develop as basketball players. I mean, we see that most with the big guys, whether it's Christ Kumanji or some of these guys they've had throughout his time there. He always seems to have like a 7'2" guy who isn't very skilled but can block a lot of shots and kind of develops over his 4-year career. So I think the advantage of playing that amount of depth is you have all these athletes, and they just kind of wear the opposing team down, especially when they press. I know they do like to press a little bit. But yeah, this year it's been a team that I didn't expect to be quite so good. I thought Terrence Mann was going to have even a bigger year than he did have. But they've been deep. They've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They've got like 8 guys averaging 6.6 points per game or more, which is kind of an incredible stat. Angola has been really solid. The junior college transfer wasn't expected to really contribute as much as he has. Phil Kofer's been good, kind of stat sheet stuffer. So it's going to be an interesting ball game because I think they match up with Gonzaga's length pretty well. That's one of the things I think that makes Gonzaga difficult to guard. But I'm pretty confident in my pick of Gonzaga here. I think they might win by 10, 15 points just because we really don't know the Florida State to show up, And we're only 2-3 weeks removed from Florida State getting pummeled by Louisville at a Barclays Center, and then they looked so good against Xavier. But, I mean, I don't know that I trust this team, and I trust Mark Few as much as any coach in the country. So I'm going to roll with the Zags here.
I'm actually going to go with the upset. I'm going to go with Florida State. I think that Gonzaga, with their first 2 matchups and for most of the regular season, had this distinct athleticism advantage in the front court, and they're not going to have that with Florida State. Few teams in the country can match Florida State's mixture of length, athleticism, and then size in the front court. Guys like you mentioned John Kumaje, like 7'3". Ike Obiagu is like 7'1" and is one of like the leading shot blockers in the ACC despite coming off the bench. And they have another guy who played really well in the first 2 rounds of the tournament, Kabengele, who's a center. He's a redshirt freshman. And all of their long athletic wings can also hit shots and put the ball on the floor a little bit. So this is, I think, a really favorable matchup for Florida State. I think guys like Jonathan Williams are going to get a bit neutralized, and even the guy like Rui Hachimura. So that's my main justification for taking the Seminoles here.
To me, a lot of this game comes down to Josh Perkins because Perkins, there's been some times in this tournament where I thought he was playing a bit of hero ball, where as the point guard of this team, he has to distribute. He has to penetrate and look for better shots for his teammates. I think, especially against an athletic team like Florida State, he has to do a really good job of getting his teammates involved because he'll get swarmed by these long athletes if he tries to isolate and go nuts. And that's not a recipe for Gonzaga's success. I think he has a chance to maybe get some looks one-on-one, maybe even get him some post-ups in the high post if he gets guarded by C.J. Walker, who's a bit undersized. Perkins somewhat long at 6'3", could get a shot up over him. I think that's an interesting matchup to look at. And then Zach Norvell, I mean, what more can you say about the game he had against Ohio State? 28 points, 12 rebounds, 4 assists. The freshman from Simeon in Chicago is just really had a tremendous kind of close to this season. The talent is through the roof, and I think if he can continue to play like that, Gonzaga could win a national title.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, Gonzaga was pretty much dead in the water against UNC Greensboro until he hit that huge 3-pointer. I'm not sure if he's a guy that could potentially leave early in the coming seasons. You never kind of know how these guys break out. a guy like Silas Melson for Gonzaga. He's really improved over his 4 years. He never had the freshman season of a Zach Norvell, but Gonzaga has really benefited for getting these from getting these kind of not necessarily under recruited, but they get a lot of international guys, and then when they're upperclassmen, they are really elite players, especially for the WCC, but even nationally.
Yeah, and I think getting a guy like Norvell really speaks to what this Gonzaga program has grown into. Going in and not only getting a top 100 recruit in Zach Norvell, but getting a kid from Simeon, one of the powerhouses in Chicago and really in high school basketball, getting a kid who was wanted by Florida State, Georgetown, Iowa State, programs like that, who were all desiring his services. To come out not only across the country to the West Coast in Spokane and to play at small little Gonzaga, but to be willing to even redshirted last season. So I mean that he can continue to build, and that Mark Few has built up a program where kids from Simeon are choosing to go to Gonzaga over Iowa State and Georgetown. Really just speaks to what this program has become and what the future of it is.
Okay, so do you think it's time to move to Friday's slate?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so Friday's slate has a few more brand names, a few more big brand name matchups. The first one in the Midwest region is between Clemson and Kansas. Clemson absolutely slaughtered Auburn on I believe that was Sunday, and then Kansas narrowly escaped against Seton Hall. I was heavily pulling for Seton Hall. That was my big upset of my bracket, having Seton Hall in the Elite Eight. Some late foul trouble, or some early foul trouble to Kaneen Carrington, and some late foul trouble kind of did them in. So Kevin, who do you have in this Clemson-Kansas battle?
I am gonna roll with the upset. I am picking Clemson to win this ball game. This is gonna be kind of a controversial pick, but I just love their guards. I think they have enough in that backcourt to go, match Devontae Graham and those guys one bucket for bucket. Marquise Reed has had a tremendous season, averaging 16 points, 5 rebounds, 3.5 assists. Gabe DeVoe hits big shots for this team. Sheldon Mitchell can really play. So those three guys I think they're going to hit enough shots. And I think, I think you could look at a guy like Elijah Thomas to really have a big game against this front court. We saw what Angel Delgado was able to do against them, especially on the glass. I think he'll have a really nice game. And their depth is a concern for me against Kansas, but Kansas is in a team that's deep and can keep running bodies at them. That will be a big challenge there. Kansas, I don't think they've played their best basketball in this tournament. That remains to be seen if they will do that, coming up in the next couple of games. But I think I'm going to roll with Clemson right now. It's a bit of a bold take, but I'm rolling with the Tigers and Brad Brownell.
Yeah, I think you make a excellent point about how Clemson's guards and wings kind of match up well with Kansas's wings. I know Gabe DeVoe is known as a very very strong defender. Marcus Reed is very athletic. Sheldon Mitchell is an excellent point guard. So they definitely have the pieces. I think I'm going with Kansas here. Their offense was almost unstoppable against Seton Hall. They were getting tons of open looks. Guys like Svi Mikhailuk and LeGerald Vick were really knocking down shots. And then Malik Newman has started to deliver on the immense hype that surrounded him. He was a guy who was projected to be a lottery pick before he played in college. Had a disappointing first year at Mississippi State. Unexpectedly transfers when people thought he was just going to go pro. And he had a slow start to his career at Kansas, but has sharpened his decision making and is hitting more shots, making more plays, and has become a really nice secondary option to a Devontae Graham. I think with Graham's Graham's amazing senior season, Azubuike's skills in the post matched with Clemson's lack of depth in the front court, and then now Malik Newman, has kind of emerged. I think that's a recipe for Kansas to be a really dangerous team from here on out.
Yeah, and I certainly think they can make a run here. I think as you mentioned, they made some great points. Their guards are as good as any in college basketball. I do think though that Clemson plays really good defense. I think that's kind of been one of the overlooked things about this team. There's been so much talk about all these guards that they send out who can really go get a bucket, but you look at their defense, 26 nationally in defensive scoring average. Only averaging about 65 points a game given up. They get down and defend, even though they don't have depth necessarily. Elijah Thomas blocks some shots, even though he's a bit undersized. At 6'9" to be a center in the ACC, he's very athletic. He can go up and get shots. And DeVoe's an excellent defender in one-on-one. Shelton Mitchell, I don't think necessarily gets enough credit. And they play good team defense. I think that's one of the underrated things. No real stats to back that one up, but just you feel like they play really well together. A lot of those close losses last year have really taught them a lot of lessons. And I'm kind of looking forward to this game a little more than I think a lot of people are, because they really think they can make some noise and pull the upset.
I think an underrated note here is, Nevada's talked about transfer U, but Clemson has totally rebuilt their program and saved Brad Brownell's job with the transfer. Sheldon Mitchell used to play for Vanderbilt. Marcus Reed used to play for Robert Morris. Elijah Thomas for Texas A&M. Mark Donnell for Michigan, and David Scarr for Valpo. So I just love how teams are thinking outside the box more when building a team. A guy like Scarra was like a role player at Valpo, and they identified him, and now he's able to play the same role that he did at Valpo at Clemson, despite being a higher level. While he's not like a total impact player, those types of savvy moves are how you get a team in the Sweet 16.
Yeah, and I also think Marquise Reed is just such an incredible story. This was a guy who really had not much Division I interest coming out of high school in Maryland. He went to Robert Morris, absolutely lit it up as a freshman, had that monster game against Duke in a 116 game. And I was like, oh man, watch out if this kid stays for 3 more years. Of course, he kind of set into motion, in my opinion, kind of like the big NEC transfer wave. I know it had been kind of happening before, but to me, that's kind of the face of that movement. He had offers from pretty much everyone once he chose to transfer. Went to Clemson, which I think was a great decision, because I think in a lot of cases, a guy like Reed might have went to Miami or a Texas, a big name school for their basketball program, or that has a bigger tradition. But at the same time, Reed came in last season and played a big role right away, and then has only seen his role grow more this season. He's a guy who's just a supremely talented player. And once again, I mean, just question, how did he wind up at Robert Morris? I mean, he's 6'3", even if he can't play the point, which, he's really a combo guard, but at 6'3", he's big enough to play the 2 at, every A10 school and probably some of the ACC. The fact that he slipped to Robert Morris coming out of high school is just absolutely unbelievable to me, and still is every time I watch him play.
Another unrelated Robert Morris story, but very very notable. Rodney Pryor for Georgetown last year. He started his career at Robert Morris, and the jump he made from his last year at Robert Morris in the NEC to his first year and only year in the Big East was absolutely remarkable. His scoring stayed exactly the same. He cut his turnovers. He dramatically improved his 3-point percentage from 29% at Robert Morris to 41% at Georgetown, and he improved his field goal percentage and kind of got on the NBA radar. Just kind of shows you that there's so much talent in these low and mid-major ranks, and guys who slip through the cracks. If you can get them up to your high major program, they can make a world of difference.
Yes, indeed. Pryor had an excellent season at Georgetown. Elijah Minnie's a guy who was at Robert Morris at one point. He's balling at Eastern Michigan, so maybe not as big a program. Isaiah still had 16 a game at Robert Morris. He's going to be at Iona next season as he set up this year at Iona. They've had their fair share of high level players transfer out of their program. All league type players in the NEC, and they've proven to be all league level players in their own conferences higher up. And so, I mean, you certainly wonder with the NEC, and I'm sure this is something we can get to in an off-season podcast, a league that produces just so much talent, but at the same time can't hold on to it. And how do we continue to keep this balance? But I think we've probably hit on this Clemson Kansas game enough. I'm rolling with the upset. Brad taking chalk with Kansas. Headed out to the other game in that region. Probably the game that will get the most hype, even though to me, I'm actually just not at all enthused to watch either team play. Syracuse and Duke. Syracuse is going to zone Duke. Duke is going to look confused trying to deal with the zone. Duke will probably zone Syracuse. Syracuse will probably struggle with the zone because they just don't have that many talented offensive players. In short, this one's going to be ugly. Brad, I think Duke's just going to win. I had a friend text me yesterday and said Duke doesn't even need a strategy in this game. There's Coach K should just tell Grayson and Gary Trent to chuck threes and then hope that Wendell Carter and Marvin Bagley can just get enough offensive rebounds against the zone. That's probably a good strategy, right? I feel like they'd probably win that game if they just do that.
Absolutely. I mean, Syracuse's front line is very long. Syracuse is the biggest team in the country. They're number one in like the weighted average height metric, but they're very thin. Guys like Mark Dolezaj, who I really, really like. He's like 180 pounds at 6'9". Pascal Chukwu is very thin at 7'2". So, guys like Bagley and Carter, they can kind of move these guys out of the paint and kind of carve out some space, some space beside the basket. And the high-low, when the ball gets into the middle of that Syracuse 2-3, a lot of times there's going to be a easy lob or an easy kind of bounce pass in there for a dunk. I totally agree that this game is going to be ugly, and I totally agree that Duke is going to come out ahead. And while people were kind of moaning on Twitter how ugly that Syracuse makes the game, I actually kind of like watching Syracuse play.
Yeah, I mean, the zone can be fun. I don't think it'll be fun in this game, although, like you said, I really think there's some interesting potential for some high-low lobs between Carter and Bagley if they send one of those guys to the high post. I think the benefit for Duke here is that they had a full week to prepare, comparative to, as much as we like to criticize Michigan State for that game on over the weekend, and the criticism is thoroughly deserved. Their game plan was ridiculously bad. They only did have one day to prepare. Even if Tom Izzo has certain things he wants to execute, it sometimes can be difficult to just get the player's mindset right for playing against such a different defense, especially in this day and age. The zone is kind of a lost art, if you will. Duke's had a few more days to prepare for that. I'll expect them to have drawn up some high-low lobs, as you mentioned. I think it'll be very interesting to see how Chukwu manages this game and how they manage Chukwu. In terms of he's obviously very tall and might be able to knock away some lobs. But at the same time, if Duke can get some one-on-one post touches, I like Wendell Carter or Marvin Bagley's ability to just kind of push around the skinnier Chukwu. I think Duke wins. I think it's going to be one of those games where Duke runs out to like a 12-point lead somewhat early, and then it just kind of sits there, and like Syracuse hits a couple of shots and gets to like 8, and then it pops back up to Duke's 12, and it never really gets any closer than that. Duke kind of keeps them at arm's distance the entire game and wins this one. Game's probably going to be in the 60s, 64-55, something like that.
Yeah, that sounds about right to me. I mean, one interesting wrinkle I noticed about this Syracuse zone is they like to send Chukwu up to guard the high post a lot. So, there could be a scenario where like the ball goes to Bagley, Chukwu goes up to the high post, and then either Dolezaj or Brissett, whoever's on the weak side, has to drop, and then that's Wendell Carter, moving a guy like Dolezaj out of the way. That could get really ugly in terms of fouls. Syracuse racking up some foul trouble and just easy buckets. Syracuse plays the hero ball offense with Frank Howard and Tyus Battle, and with good reason. O'Shea Brissett can score too, but Battle and Howard handle the ball like at least 95% of the time, and they take most of the shots. Guys like Chukwu and Matthew Moyer like don't even get looks, and that's kind of for the better for the Syracuse offense.
I will say one kind of challenge here for Duke is these guys, especially these freshmen, aren't used to having to play with the discipline that it takes, especially in a game where, adrenaline's rushing, your heart's pounding, the discipline that it takes to play against the zone. Marvin Bagley's used to his entire career being able to use his athletic ability to go get himself a bucket. Same thing goes for Wendell Carter. Same thing goes for Trayvon Duval. Grayson Allen's the only real experienced guy in this rotation other than maybe Javin DeLaurier, and he's just kind of the worst matchup possible for the zone, given the fact that he can't really shoot. He's not as tall as Bagley or Carter. But I think that's kind of an underrated aspect. Is yes, the plan of playing Bagley in the high post, say, and letting him attack and pass out is one thing. But how will Bagley react when he catches in the high post and he thinks he's got space, and all of a sudden he's trapped with several defenders surrounding him? How does he manage those? So it's going to be really interesting, to see his maturity in this ball game, and how he manages that kind of situation of staying within himself and not forcing things in a style that's easy to do so.
Yeah, I think another interesting point is how does Trayvon Duval even play in this game? Where he's a guy who needs a lot of time to get his outside shot off, and it's not it's not a very good outside shot. He's a huge liability in that zone offense. I'm pulling up the box score right now from when the two played in the regular season, and Duke won 60-44, kind of similar to what you were saying. Trayvon Duval only played 25 minutes in that game. He was 1 for 8 from the field, 1 for 5 from 3. Duke as a team in this game was 2 for 18 from 3, so that's something to watch. Where Syracuse's length has been extremely disruptive for teams that are trying to hit these outside shots on them. But guys like Wendell Carter got theirs. Marvin Bagley was 8 for 9 for 19 points. So that looks to be the area where Duke can really punish Syracuse.
Yeah, I completely agree there. I think that's kind of all I have on this ball game and on this region. I think if we get Duke, Kansas, I think that'll be ratings galore. That's for sure. What would be your just like kind of quickest reaction to Duke, Kansas? Because I know there'll be people looking for it if that game does happen.
In terms of who is going to win, I think I'd go with Duke. It's tough though. I mean, both are top 5 teams in the country, in my opinion. Kansas is kind of small inside. I think Bagley could kind of have a field day there. And I think Duke's zone could maybe hurt Kansas. It's going to definitely be a close game, but I think I'd go with Duke in that potential game.
Yeah, I think I would lean there as well. But I think that's the interesting potential matchup down the line. Let's move on to the final region. We have to take on the East region. We've got Villanova and West Virginia in the first one. West Virginia played some really good basketball in San Diego in the opening weekend. I want to lean towards this upset, but at the same time, I think I'm going to lean with Villanova just because they just have that second gear where they turn it on. Mikal Bridges is a tough matchup in this game. I think he can kind of take a lot of stuff away, make it hard for West Virginia to run offense in this ball game. I think Villanova wins this one late in a real tight ball game. What are you thinking here, Brad?
So I also have the Wildcats here. Since that they've become fully healthy, they've been a completely different team because guys like Colin Gillespie and Darmir Cosby-Roundtree have kind of benefited from the minutes when Booth was out and when Eric Paschal was out. And they've kind of developed more and have become extremely reliable, especially Colin Gillespie. He's a legitimate player now who you can play 15 to 20 minutes. And then you have one of if not the best point guard in the country in Jalen Brunson. Mikal Bridges is like this elite NBA wing. DiVincenzo has completely broken out. He's a future all Big East player, future Big East player of the year. And then Spellman is such a talented big man, such a matchup nightmare. He can pull Sagaba Konate away from the rim. And Villanova is so disciplined and so ball movement oriented that I don't think that West Virginia's pressure is going to have as much of an impact as it would over a less disciplined team.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point about their discipline. I also think the lineups they're going to play at any given time. I'm great with Jalen Brunson handling the ball against any defender in the country. Mikal Bridges can put it on the deck without a problem. DiVincenzo's a good handler of the ball. Phil Booth can do it. Eric Pascal can even put it on the floor a little bit. I think the only guy in this only two guys in this rotation are Spellman and Cosby Roundtree, who you wouldn't really want putting it on the deck. And even Spellman has the ability to, catch it, put it on the deck for a couple of bounces, and then make a good pass. So I think that's a very beneficial side of it. I think you make an excellent point with Spellman. I hadn't even realized how good of a shooter he was. I mean, obviously, I knew he had been hitting threes, but he's shooting 44% on 4 attempts a game. I mean, this guy is a really darn good shooter for his size, and his ability to step out is really dangerous. DiVincenzo's been playing excellent basketball. It's a tough matchup for West Virginia, in my opinion. I think Kanate is going to have to take away a lot of things at the rim. He's going to have to block shots. But as you mentioned, Spellman's ability to pull him away from the rim will be key. I still think Villanova wins. I think it's close, though. I really just think West Virginia is playing really solid basketball. And you never want to bet against seniors in March. And Javon Carter's one of the better seniors in college basketball. He's certainly going to be ready to go. Yeah,
Carter's one of my favorite players in the whole country. I think he's going to be a first-round pick in the NBA draft. I think he'll get picked in that last, 6 or 7 picks in the first round. And they have so many wings, which I like. Guys like Wesley Harris and Issa Ahmad and Lamont West. And while Ahmad and West haven't been as good as I thought, they're certainly high-level players. And maybe that positional size could cause some issues for Villanova if the Wildcats choose to go small.
Yeah, that's a good call. I think it's a tough matchup. In some ways, I think it's a great matchup for West Virginia because it's a team that isn't going to expose them down low, and it's a team that that you can press and get up and down with. But at the same time, it's a bad matchup because you trust their guards. If West Virginia was playing Syracuse, I'd be like, oh wow, this is an easy win for West Virginia. The guards are going to turn it over. Even a team like Texas A&M, Michigan, teams like that who are still around. Even Kentucky, I wouldn't like the matchup necessarily because their guards would have such a challenge with keep taking care of the basketball. Villanova's, that's not something I'm really concerned about.
Yeah, and Kentucky inexplicably beat West Virginia earlier in the season, right? Where West Virginia was up by 15 or 20 points and it just collapsed.
Yeah, that was a weird game. I remember turning it off and then seeing later that Kentucky had turned around and won it, and I was like, wait, what even happened? And I watched some of the film and I was like, okay. West Virginia basically just Kentucky made their run and West Virginia just absolutely folded like a cheap suit. It was pretty tough to watch.
And I think one last thing on this game is I think that Teddy Allen could have a big game. He's a 6'6", 2-3 type of player. Has a little TJ Warren in his game. I think he could go into the post on a Phil Booth and maybe take advantage, get some shots around the rim.
Yeah, he's a really good player. I think he's kind of been underrated, throughout this process because West Virginia is such a defensive team and they're so much known for their ability to defend. They've got some really interesting pieces kind of down their bench in that 4th to 6th options, beyond Javon Carter and Daxter Miles and the guys in the backcourt as well as Kanate, who's had such a good year, kind of out of surprise. That moves us to our last game, Texas Tech and Purdue. Big story here. Isaac Haas is still likely out. I know Purdue's engineering students are attempting to make him a brace that will pass the NCAA requirements. I saw him try to shoot free throws over the weekend. There was a video of it. He couldn't let go of the ball because he couldn't get the bend properly. I just don't see how he plays, and if he does, how he's at all effective. I almost think Purdue's better off just not playing him. What are you thinking here, Brad? Because I had Purdue in my national title game, But without Haas, he really takes away a big part of what their offense wants to do.
So I think that this is kind of like the forgotten matchup of the Sweet 16 because it's such a good game between two very high seeds, but not a lot of people are talking about it besides the whole Haas brace angle. I think Matt Harms is a very good player. That's something that I was really surprised about. I know that I watched Purdue a lot over the summer when they were playing in the World University games, and they really struggled, especially defensively. Haas was pretty bad defensively in that, but Harms couldn't play because he's not American. And now that Haas was or Harms, excuse me, was playing some pretty big minutes. I think he's a pretty good player and a player who Purdue should be fine with playing 25 to 28 minutes. In terms of the matchup itself, I think Texas Tech's going to come out, come out on top. I think the health of Zach Smith has been such a big addition for them because he's so athletic. He can play the 4 and the 5, and he kind of gives them a different look. Where guys like Tommy Hamilton and Norenzi Odiazi are more traditional, more like plotting big men. Hamilton can shoot it, but Smith has that kind of mobility and athleticism that can really make a small ball Texas Tech lineup really dangerous.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think one of the matchups I'm really interested in here is Purdue's defense all year has been much better than we expected. It's tough to defend in the Big Ten when your lead guards are 5'11" PJ Thompson and 6'1" Carson Edwards. PJ is a bit of a pest, but Carson Edwards is just not a very good defender. Dakota Mathias is really good on ball, but he's only 6'4", and Harms is taking away a lot at the rim. With Texas Tech, it's a team that's so long in the backcourt. Evans is 6'3" with long arms. Culver and Zaire Smith and Naeem Stevenson, 3 guys who are athletic wings who can bounce and shoot the ball a little bit. It becomes a really difficult matchup. If I'm Purdue to match up with these guys man to man, with the exception of just them going by and your defense being Matt Harms protecting the rim. So to me, that's a tough matchup because I really worry if you're putting a PJ Thompson on Keenan Evans. Does Evans post him up? If you're talking about Jarrett Culver or Zaire Smith, can they really do work on Carson Edwards? One of those guys creating off the bounce. I'm starting to lean. I think Texas Tech win this ball game, especially without Haas, who's kind of the great equalizer on offense. I think Zach Smith can do a lot, as you mentioned. He can guard Vince Edwards, who's kind of the one matchup nightmare that they do have. So yeah, I'm gonna roll with Texas Tech in this ball game by 5 to 10 points.
Yeah, I also have Texas Tech in this one, and Carson Edwards is one of, if not my least favorite player in the country. There's so many times I watch him, I have my head in my hands with like a contested pull-up 3 that he takes. I could only imagine being a Purdue fan and just seeing him jack up multiple contested shots trying to get his scoring average up or get his points in a particular game. All season. Like if I had to watch 36 games of that, I think I'd be crazy.
Yeah, no, he's fun to watch because he can just make tough shots, but at the same time, have to consider how frustrating it is to watch when he isn't hitting his shots. Good thing for Purdue fans. That hasn't been that often. One more nugget to leave you all on this game. Chris Beard 1-0 in his career against Matt Painter. What a ball game that one was. Little Rock against Purdue a few years back. I believe it was a 4-13 game. Little Rock came back late, hit a 3 to tie it, went to overtime and won it. That was a fun ball game, Brad. Do you remember that one? I'd picked that upset in my bracket. It looked dead in the water. They came back and won. I looked like a genius. Haven't had that much luck since, but I'm going to hold on to that one and Stephen F. Austin over West Virginia that year as the year that my bracket was actually good.
So 2 things. One is that year I had West Virginia winning it all, and they lost in the first round. They got manhandled, I think, by Stephen F. Austin. And then second, I actually went to the tournament that year, so I was not able to see that Arkansas Little Rock game because that was the same day, as the Providence site. So I was at, I think it was Baylor Yale was on at the same time, which was a pretty good upset in its own right. But I definitely missed that. It was a double overtime, right? The Purdue Arkansas Little Rock game.
Yeah, I think it was two overtimes, if I recall correctly. That was just a terrific game. That was a weird Little Rock team because Chris Beard basically brought in a bunch of JUCO kids, a grad transfer to just an entirely upperclassman team. He brought in a team that was nothing before. He came in, won 30 games, went to the NCAA tournament, and immediately left. Wes Flanagan, his associate head coach, took over with basically a bare cupboard. Was terrible last season, terrible this season. Now he's been fired. It was a pretty quick flip job, but it's worked out for Chris Beard. Hasn't necessarily worked out for the Little Rock program. Although if you can win an NCAA tournament game, I don't think you have too much to complain about.
No, I mean if you're like a middling program in the Sun Belt, take that 30-win season and cherish that.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there, Brad. I believe that wraps up us on the games. We did have want to do kind of a quick whip around to kind of update you on kind of the coaching news, update you on a couple of transfers. We'll do that for about 10 minutes to wrap up this podcast, 10 minutes at the most. But Brad, I think the big story here is Danny Hurley right now deliberating, likely as we speak, as to what his next destination will be. I saw a tweet saying they hope Dan Hurley would have a signing day ceremony where he'd come out with the 3 hats and choose which one. I'd be all for it. I think it'd be fun. Great television, great content. What are you thinking here with Danny Hurley? Where does he wind up in the end, Brad? I think he still takes UConn in the end.
I 100% agree. I think this is a situation where people thought he was going to UConn for months now. That all this kind of leaking information from agents or like from whatever side it is, leaking this information is kind of changing people's thought process. When I think this is all a distraction, and he's going to be the UConn coach, probably for less than what Pitt's offering. But UConn's just a better program. They've won 4 national championships in like the last 20 years. You can recruit there. You can easily get back to the top of the conference in the American. Wichita State's losing a lot of guys. Cincinnati could be losing most of their key contributors, and Houston's losing Rob Gray and Devin Davis. So there's a quick turnaround there.
Yeah, I think the money's the big one. That's kind of the hanging point here. I know that's been discussed that Pitt's offering $3 million, UConn around $2 million. My guess throughout this whole process is UConn will come up to 2.5, and they will be very happy, shake hands, and have a deal. Hasn't happened yet. My guess is it happens very, very soon. And then I think it sets into motion a chain of events. Hot take here. This leads. We will have, Kevin Willard leaves Seton Hall, goes to Pittsburgh. Tim Cluse from Iona to Seton Hall, and sort of unrelated, but Chris Mack to Xavier. From Xavier, to Louisville, and then Travis Steele takes over at Xavier. That's kind of the coaching carousel train of events, in my opinion, of what will happen. And I guess I didn't replace Iona yet. Iona will hire their associate head coach Jared Grasso, who is a bright star in this business.
Yeah, I think Jared Grasso was up for the Quinnipiac job last year, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah,
Grasso. He's an awesome recruiter. He recruits nationally. He can go get JUCOs, grad transfers. He's a huge part of Iona's success. I think he'd do a great job as the head man there. He was a complete slam dunk for Iona. For Quinnipiac last year. He's an alum. He's had so much success in the MAC. He can recruit JUCOs at Quinnipiac. But Quinnipiac, their AD was looking to kind of make a big splash because they've stated their goal is to eventually be in the Big East, which is kind of crazy when, Quinnipiac plays in a 3,500 seat facility and, has had hadn't won a MAC tournament game until this year. So yeah, it was a bit of an outlandish statement, but their philosophy was, well, we're good at hockey and we're really good at women's basketball. And if we can that means that there's possibility we could become really good at men's basketball. And if we do, we could go to the Big East.
Well, I mean, they could go to the Hockey East. I mean, the Hockey East has like UNH and Maine and Providence and Yukon and Merrimack. I mean, there's no rhyme or reason to that. So, I mean, I have no idea how college hockey works. Um, I'd see a couple Providence scores every now and then, but I
Yeah,
don't
for
know if
whatever reason, for
yeah
whatever reason, Quinnipiac thinks they're headed to the Big East. I don't see it, but
yeah. Sorry,
they had
Quinnipiac.
they had this big vision of it. So they went out and they spent all this money. They've been spending money as an institution. They have a med school and a law school that they're building, I believe. And so they're spending all sorts of money, and they went out and made a big splash with Baker Dunleavy. Can't really complain about it. Just kind of terrible timing for Jared Grasso, who kind of deserved that job. I think there's a small chance he'd follow Tim Cluse to Seton Hall if Tim Cluse goes to Seton Hall. But I think now's the time for him to get a head coaching job. It'd be seamless for him at Iona. He'd bring in good players. That's kind of all we think we need to chat about here about Jared Grasso and some MAC job openings.
Okay, so then probably the biggest transfer off the top of my head. I know that Omer Yurtseven said he was transferring. I think he's 100% going pro. That would make, I think, the biggest transfer. Keyshawn Woods from Wake Forest averaged 13 points a game. He's a shooting guard, shot like 41% from three, and he is a grad transfer because he played a year at UNC Charlotte and then 2 years at Wake Forest. So any team that needs some scoring punch on the like in the backcourt, I think he might be the highest profile guy out there right now.
Yep, he was a good name. Don Coleman from Cal announced he was exploring his options. He's a guy who I believe he'd be I don't know if he's a grad transfer, if he's a sit one, play one. Either way, he's a guy who can really score the ball. I know Armand Davis, who's kind of had an up and down career at Alabama, is announced he was grad transferring. He's kind of the 6'6" combo wing. He's gotten offers from like 7 mid-majors already today. So he's going to be pretty sought after as a guy who can come in and give some good minutes. David Caraher is a guy from Chapel Hill who went to Houston Baptist this season, was a former Butler commit. I don't know what really happened there that it fell through. But he wound up at Houston Baptist, had a huge freshman year season average, I think 16 and 7, shooting 36% from three as a 6'6" like combo forward wing. He could go to a high major. I'm trying to see if there's any other big transfers of note. Tariq Owens is leaving St. John's more than likely. He'll be a grad transfer big. I know. I think Maryland mentioned they might be interested. So some interesting names. Oh, Joe Chartouni from Fordham. Fordham's bound for another 25-loss year. Quick plug to Northwestern. If they're looking for a grad transfer point guard, which my gut is they are, Joe Chartouni would be a great fit. He's a great on-ball defender. He can shoot the three a little bit. He can kind of run the show. He'd be kind of the perfect fit. He's a smart kid who just graduated in 3 years, so maybe the high academics at Northwestern would interest him. So if anyone's out there listening from Northwestern, a certain Northwestern student would love you guys to get involved with Joe Chartouni.
Yeah, Chartouni was the big one that I had forgot. I know a lot of people speculating that he'll go to West Virginia. West Virginia could definitely use a grad transfer point guard. I don't know what the connection was besides he's a good defender, and so is Javon Carter. Tariq Owens was a huge loss for St. John's. I think he left the door open to potentially come back. James Scott from Kennesaw State, who's like a 17-point per game guy. He's made some visits already. I think he visited St. John's and Virginia Tech, if I'm not mistaken, already. He's a sit one, play two, who has numerous high major suitors. There's a few other grad transfers out there, nothing too impactful. Tyson Jolly for Baylor was a former Cal commit, but he had some health problems. He never really found a role for Baylor. And then the big pit trio of Marcus Carr, Shamil Stevenson, and Ryan Luther, right? They all said that they're transferring.
Yeah, and Luther will be a grad transfer. He can stretch the floor. He's really good. So he'll be an interesting piece. Jared Wilson Frame also is leaving Pitt.
He is?
Yeah, he announced it a little later, but he announced he is transferring or at least exploring his options. He'd be, I believe, a sit one, play one. So I don't know how that will impact his stock. But yes, he and everyone else is considering leaving Pittsburgh at this point.
Yeah, sit one, play one is very valuable in like the right situation. And Arizona really struggled with Ryan Anderson from Boston College a few years ago, where they just needed like a little stopgap between I think Aaron Gordon and Larry Markkinen. So there are definitely scenarios where sit one, play one could really come in handy. I know one for next year is Mariel Shayok, who former Virginia, and next year will probably start at the 3 for Iowa State, and Iowa State team that has top 25 potential. Even probably could be in the preseason top 25.
Yeah, that's another good one. And then of course there's been everyone's entering the draft without an agent. I don't think there's been a name where I'm really like concerned that a guy who was entering without an agent that I was shouldn't enter is going to wind up signing with one. Like guys like Justin Wright Foreman have put their name in. It's just some mid-major players, which I can't fault them. They get their name out there and they get a chance to play, do some workouts, get that experience. But I don't think there was anyone on that list, Brad, that was all that noteworthy.
I think two guys who said that they're going without an agent that if I'm a fan of these teams, I could be a little worried would be Tyler Cook from Iowa and Jalen McDaniels from San Diego State. I don't know if they are seriously considering staying, but I mean, Cook is one of the best players in the Big Ten. He's a sophomore, 4.5. And then Jalen McDaniels, when you watch him play, you can see the upside. He's super athletic. He plays the 5 for San Diego State. He'll probably be more of like a glue guy, 4-man in the NBA. But both guys could certainly get there, if not this year, then over the next 2 seasons.
Yeah, and McDaniels is really talented. He'd be a guy where I wouldn't be surprised, like if he's going into the process not planning to declare, and then all of a sudden gets told by all these teams that his like stock is rising big, and he winds up leaving, and then winds up stuck in the D League for a year, which to me is not the right strategy. But if he gets drafted high enough, maybe it's worth it for him. We'll kind of see what happens there. He's certainly an interesting prospect to monitor, both short and long term. Brett, anything you wanted to touch on real quick before we wrap up this show?
Nope, that is it for me.
I think that's it for myself as well. Everybody enjoy your weekend of Sweet 16 Elite 8 basketball. Enjoy your coaching search rumors and hilarity. We had like 23 minutes today where we thought Sean Miller was going to Pitt. That was fun. I'm sure there'll be more crazy moments over the next few days, weeks, and we'll be always here to break them down on the CBB Central podcast. Thanks as always for listening, and have a great night.